The Admiral Nakhimov, aka the Red Hammer, aka Broadside Bingo, aka other cool names that I thought of on the fly. There's no two ways about it. This ship does a metric ass ton of damage. We're talking 20k rocket salvos, we're talking 20k torpedo salvos, we're talking skip bombers that... We're talking sometimes 30k rocket salvos. The Nakhimov is the ultimate broadside punisher. All three plane types require a flat target to dish out the full damage, which makes it probably one of the least flexible carriers in the game, and with only one drop per squadron, it provides the least amount of spotting time of all carriers. Not to mention the fact that it's categorically one of the worst carriers in regards to dealing with destroyers who don't have their brains turned off. And you know what? I'll go ahead and say it. Against anyone who actually uses their keyboard when they see you coming, Nakhimov struggles a little bit to get enough damage to justify only having the one strike. So that should mean that Nakhimov doesn't perform well in live battles, right? No. People show flat broadside to these planes all the time. Yamato's sailing quarter speed behind their team? Dumpstered. French and American battleships caught in the middle of a turn? Dumpstered. Russian and German battleships sitting there being a bullet sponge for their team? Not so much, but you get the point. These rockets do batshit crazy damage. They are the bread and butter of this ship. They take a very long time to fire after you click, but with a little practice, it's not hard to get pretty accurate with them. And even outside of the damage that they do, they are single-handedly controlling the battlefield. The enemy has two options when they see these rockets coming. They can either not move and accept the fact that they're about to eat 20k damage plus fires, or they can turn and leave the area, thereby giving your team the pressure advantage. It's not fair, and I'm not going to pretend like it is. The only real answer to Nakhimov rockets is to stay grouped up on the flank, so they might actually lose some planes for making the strike. Either way, there's no winning against it, and God have mercy on your soul if you're sailing a Kearsarge and there's a Nakhimov in your game. Now let's go to Torpedo Town, and I won't sugarcoat it, Nakhimov probably has the least user-friendly torpedoes at tier 10. At a base speed of 124 knots before skills and equipment, it's going to feel like you're trying to fly a billboard into the wind. And then when you finally get the strike package there, they have the longest arming time of any aerial torpedo at tier 10 by a country mile, making them quite easy to dodge if your target's actually paying attention. I've dropped torpedoes onto broadside cruisers who are in reverse. I aimed for them to accelerate forward, they did so, and they still outmaneuvered the torpedoes. Now don't get me wrong, if you can actually connect with what you're aiming at, they hit pretty hard. 5,200 damage per torpedo, and you start with 7 planes in the strike package. But due to how slow they are, it's not uncommon to get several of your planes shot down while you're making the strike, so it's mandatory to make sure you have some speed boost for the final approach, otherwise you're likely to only get 4 or 5 torpedoes in the water. I also want to mention that even if you connect with every torpedo in the squadron, the damage you get is only slightly more than one pass from Midway or Hakuryu, who obviously gets several drops per squadron. Now to cover all of our bases, I want to briefly cover the skip bombers, and when I say briefly, I mean it. Ready? Here it goes. They're bad. Very bad. Wildly inconsistent. If I had a dime for every time I dropped a broadside battleship with these things and only got 1 or 2 penetrations, I would be able to afford a dockyard ship. Whether you get 2,000 damage and 0 fires or 14,000 damage and a double fire, it's complete RNG and your micro aim on the target matters very little. I've tried aiming low, I've tried aiming high, and dead center. These bombs have a mind of their own and they will go wherever they please. Now don't get me wrong, if you can find a destroyer who has a death wish and sails broadside to these things, they're usually good for 2 or 3 bomb hits and about 8,000 damage. Which is kinda nice, but those destroyers are usually on my team, and Wargaming unfortunately removed friendly fire. So why is it good? The damage numbers don't seem to add up. You only get 1 strike and you have to start all over again. And yes, the rockets are broken, but the other 2 squadrons are mediocre. So why is the Nakhimov dangerous? The answer lies in the mechanic of the airstrike. You are spending the least amount of time humanly possible inside the enemy's anti-aircraft bubble. On a target that's isolated, you're entering the AA zone, and 2 seconds later, you're already sending the strike. And then your planes fly out of the AA and into safety before they can even take significant damage. Meaning, if you're targeting ships who don't have the best AA, it's virtually impossible to run out of planes, You can just keep sending rocket strike after rocket strike after rocket strike. And simultaneously, if you need to strike a target inside a heavy AA bubble, you're likely going to lose some or all of your planes, but the strike is guaranteed, and not every carrier can say that. Nakhimov is in and out before you even know what happened, and that's what makes it so strong. Now, as I said, Nakhimov is very reliant on targets being broadside to do its full damage, but on top of that, it's also kind of reliant on matchmaking. It dumpsters battleships, that's what it's designed to do. So if there aren't many around, you're not going to be as impactful as other carriers would be. However, it has a bit of an ace up its sleeve. It just so happens to be one of the best carriers for enemy CV sniping. If you ever find yourself in a game where there aren't any accessible battleships around, it is a completely valid strategy to target the enemy carrier in the Nakhimov. The one and done strike design is very good at bombing a carrier while losing minimal aircraft. Now, I don't want to get too far into the state of the game because I want to save that topic for a separate video, but to be brief, there is no shortage of novice players at Tier 10 right now. Wargaming continues to release more and more premium Tier 10 ships, making it even easier for unskilled players to play against dangerous ships like the Nakhimov. I only mention this because I said that this ship struggles a little bit against players who are actively dodging, so I want to be clear that while that remains true, you will not struggle to find a plethora of players who are sailing broadside to your strikes time and time again. Because I get how it seems sometimes when you watch a replay. I don't just play and make videos, I watch other people's videos too. I get that it's very easy to take footage of a good game that you had and make it seem like any ship in the game is OP. You might be like me and say to yourself, wow, I can't believe every ship you attacked didn't turn out and get skinny against your attack. Surely that doesn't always happen. And you'd be right, it doesn't always happen, but I'm going to be honest with you, it happens a lot. Like a lot. And until that changes, Nakhimov is going to remain one of the scariest Tier 10 carriers to play against. Because while you might be taking the appropriate dodging measures, your teammates probably aren't. And we all know how hard it is to win a game after they're all dead. The gameplay you're watching in the background isn't some crazy 300,000 damage game. I wanted to showcase what an average game looks like in this ship, just so you can see how well this ship controls the battle. And even if you're down a few ships, that is not an insurmountable obstacle for Nakhimov to overcome. Especially in a game like this where you can tuck yourself in behind a rock and the enemy team is all sailing towards you. That's when Nakhimov is at its most dangerous. The rocket boost that the planes get off the deck, along with the high alpha damage per strike, combines for some of the most obscene damage output that you have ever seen in World of Warships. It's almost like setting a trap. Your team's down a few ships, the enemy gets confident enough to all start pushing out from behind their cover to come hit the loot pinata that is your carrier. And that's when you show them the true meaning of damage per minute. They might as well have a permo camo for this ship that has "fuck around and find out" written in big bold letters on the side. Now, I don't know how Nakhimov would do in a competitive scene like Clan Battles or King of the Sea, and we likely won't ever know unless Wargaming decides to burn it all down and allow carriers into those game modes, but out here in random battles, it's currently the best damage dealing carrier in the tech tree at Tier 10. And what's crazy to me is how well this ship does considering how bad it is at spotting ships for your team. You have to rely on using your fighters for spotting most of the time because you spend such a small amount of time flying around the enemy between strikes. It's a valid strat and it works quite well. However, you only have so many fighter squadrons, so if you use your rockets as often as I do, you're going to run out of fighters very quickly if you don't use your fighters wisely. Which also means that you have to choose between using your fighters to spot for your team and using them to defend against the enemy carrier. It is not uncommon to be out of fighters with a lot of time left on the clock, which is probably the biggest weakness of Nakhimov. If the game goes long and it's a close game, you better hope your team has some destroyers left, because if not, and the enemy isn't also sailing on Nakhimov, they are likely going to have a significant vision advantage. Which leads me to my closing statement. Be prepared for your team to be flaming you in chat because you aren't picking up the slack for your dead destroyers, spotting enemy destroyers for your team in the late game. Like, homie, I ran out of fighters on my rockets and skip bombers 5 minutes ago, and I am sure as hell not sending a set of torpedo planes to the edge of the map at 130 knots just so I can lay down fighters and spot the full HP Shimakaze that you're going to hit with one overpen for 1500 damage. Obviously, there are scenarios where it's going to be more beneficial for the game outcome for you to take one for the team and go spot something, even though you know you're going to do minimal damage when you get there. But understand that most of your teammates aren't going to comprehend that in that time it'll take you to fly somewhere in those slow-ass skip bombers or torpedo bombers just for you to spot something. You could have done 2 strikes to an enemy battleship for 40,000 damage. So make sure you're making the right move is all I'm saying. Because understand that if you don't have fighters available, you are not going to be able to strike an enemy destroyer with your rockets unless he left his AA on or someone else can spot him for you. The arming time on Nakhimov rockets far exceeds the time it takes to actually spot the destroyer. And in the same vein, understand that if you send skip bombers to go on a destroyer spotting mission, you're likely only going to hit 1 bomb for 1500 damage if he isn't sailing broadside, and that's if it hits. So just do the math before you make your decision about who to strike next in scenarios like this, because killing an enemy battleship who's about to kill one of your cruisers might be more beneficial than trying to spot for someone who isn't going to be able to kill the enemy destroyer anyways. It's your ship, it's your call, there's always going to be people in chat trying to backseat you, but you're the one who knows what you have available at the moment. And that about wraps it up for my thoughts on this ship, so let me know what you guys think. I got lots more coming soon. Thanks for watching, guys. Catch you next time.